Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce. How's it
Hey,
going?
David. How are you doing today?
Oh, good. I made a major screw up in my story yesterday, Bruce, so I feel terrible about that. I'm an opinion writer, so I'm used to people disagreeing with me, and that's the way the world works and should work. We shouldn't all agree all the time, and we hash things out by discussing things. But as a reporter, when I make a mistake, that really bothers me because it's my fundamental job. And so I reported yesterday that in my story that the entire NHL had shut down. And I don't honestly know how I got that in my head. I think I read a Twitter quote that must have implied that, and it got fixed in my brain. So everything I saw after that confirmed it. Anyway, it's not the entire NHL shutting down yet. It was just cross-border games, including all the Edmonton Oilers games until after Christmas. We'll see what happens in the next day
hmm
or two here. There's now about 120 players, 119 players, I understand, in COVID protocol in the NHL. That said, Bruce, there's a different attitude in different parts of America on COVID, with the Republican states, the red states generally wanting to proceed with life, and the blue states not. So, of course, the NHL rules over all its teams in all the states. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a general lockdown. But we've got news in Edmonton, Bruce. What's happening
hmm
here? What's
Well,
happening?
what's happening here is, I mean, first of all, you already alluded, all three games that they had scheduled before Christmas involved cross-border travel for one of the two clubs. Strangely, the schedule had them playing the three California clubs after their trip to California or to Seattle on Saturday. But all you would have thought they'd just go to California and play all three teams there. But no, Anaheim was supposed to play in Edmonton tonight. Then they were supposed to go back and play LA and
Uh,
San Jose. Anyway, all of those games have been postponed because it involved cross-border travel for one team or the other. There was a couple games played last night, St. Louis and Winnipeg, uh, between cross-border teams, presumably because St. Louis was already in the country and ready to go when they played that game. But they haven't quite shut the whole league down, David, but I think there's something like 10 games remaining on the schedule of the 35 that were originally slated to be played between now and Thursday that we were supposed to break. So we have all the cross-border games canceled. Plus, there's I think at least 8 teams that were ruled out individually as teams being unable to play. Calgary Flames being sort of the canary in the coal mine, and then a whole bunch of other teams. And I think Edmonton Oilers would have been added to that list as well, given today's news that added two more players to the five that were already under COVID protocol, with the newcomers being Darnell Nurse and William Lagesson. So the Oilers currently have 7 players on the 10-day COVID protocol list. That doesn't, of course, include Cody Ceci, who had to undergo a 10-day spell of his own on that list, where he was just one player that the team sorely missed, but they were at least able to carry on business without them. Well, right now the Oilers are under duress. They've got those 7 players, which to recap is Nurse and Lagesson, Ryan Nugent Hopkins, Darnell Nurse, or sorry, Jessa Puljujarvi, Duncan Keith, Devon Shore, and Ryan McLeod, that all went on different times last week. Today's was the first announcement where they actually had 2 guys at the same time. They've had so many, and just bits and pieces of bad news coming in. And add to that the 5 players that are unavailable to the team due to injury. And that doesn't even include 3 players who haven't been available all season due to long-term injury. And all of a sudden, the organizational depth chart is looking mighty streamlined. They only have 43 players on the 50-man list who are playing professional hockey this year. And by my count, 15 of those 43 are not available as of now. So they would have been poorly placed indeed to play games this week, and I wonder, as you do, whether they will be given the go-ahead to play in Calgary a week from today.
I doubt it, Bruce. I really doubt that's going to happen. We'll see what happens. um, the is your understanding of the COVID protocol then is 10 games, or excuse me, 10
10.
days from the time.
Yeah.
So that would eliminate a number of players for the Calgary game.
Yes.
That would be obviously Nurse Lagesson,
Mm.
Puljujärvi. Um,
Yeah. Well, here's the Edmonton list. Ryan McLeod, December 14th, so he would come off before the 27th. Dave Tippett, of course, head coach, December 14th. Devon Shore on the 16th, he'd come off. Ryan Nugent Hopkins and Doug Keith on the 17th, so next Monday is 10 days. So it would depend on what is the interpretation. Do they need 10 full days after they've gone on the list, or do they come off on the 10th day? And the protocol isn't very specifically, so part of it that I read wasn't very specific. Then all of Puljujärvi, now Lagesson, Nurse have gone on subsequent to that.
so there's
So
no wiggle room, is there? If you like test, there's no wiggle room there that we know of.
not that we
If you
know
pass a
of.
test after 5 days or something,
Right.
there's none. Anyway,
Ending
there's
ending isolation. It says uh, players whose tests have been confirmed positive shall remain in isolation until all of the following conditions have been satisfied.
all right.
One of them is if at least 10 days have passed since symptoms first appeared. So now you're getting into a different gray area, talking about
Ah,
symptoms as opposed to testing. So whether there'll be some new interpretation of that, who knows? I mean, as you pointed out, many of these players that are testing positive are having minimal symptoms and are being held out of games where if they were playing with the flu, they would play a lot sicker than maybe they are, but they're being held out for there are reasons, and some of them come from the league, and some of them come from higher powers than that, I believe, of public health authorities, governments, and so on, that all have their say in all this. So I don't think you and I are in position. Certainly, I'm not in position to understand the full extent of all that interplay and why these rules get made. But I don't think it's just NHL acting alone. Let's put it that way.
no. So we can expect that Nurse Nugent Hopkins, Puljujärvi will all say on December 14th, I felt a slight tingling in my throat.
Yes.
Bruce, yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, if there was no rules in place, and how many of these players of their own volition would say that I'm not fit to play?
Yeah.
Um, Nonetheless, the rules are in place, and I think it's been raised. Well, you speculated about this in terms of the cross-border games.
Hmm.
Um, we can look at it as the NHL canceling them, but there's two governments involved here. The Canadian
Yep.
government is an immense stickler on this kind of thing. The American government's much less so. So the NHL might not have had a choice about the cross-border games. That might have been coming from a higher authority.
Very possible.
That's speculation. We don't know
Hmm.
if that's the case, but I think it's very fair speculation. We know that the NHL works closely with all levels of government, provincial, federal governments on these rules. So what they say goes. So it's an interesting time, Bruce, because
Hmm.
around the world, there's just mass confusion about Omicron. There's no confusion about how fast it spreads. It seems to spread much faster, significantly faster than every other variant. What we don't know is how this is going to impact people who have had COVID in the past, people who are double or triple vaccinated, as you are.
Yep.
That's a massive unknown with conflicting opinions coming out right now. And from an Alberta perspective, if there's a silver cloud at all, silver lining on the dark clouds, silver cloud. If there's a silver lining on the dark clouds, it's that we seem to be, as we have been a number of times during the pandemic, about 2 or 3 weeks. We're a month behind South Africa where this first hit. We're at least a month. We look like we're 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month behind the UK, Denmark. So as this plays out in those jurisdictions, we're going to see exactly how slammed their hospitals get.
Right.
And, I'm reading one report right now this is from Allison Pearson of the Daily Telegraph. She's saying what matters is how many people Omicron puts in hospital. At the moment, admissions are basically flat. The only increase is in, and this is probably a word we're all going to know in a few days from now, the only increase is in nosocomial infections. That's people catching COVID in hospital. So that seems to be where they're getting new cases. Not surprising. So what we could see is all kinds of people working at the hospitals, in the hospitals, getting COVID, getting this highly contagious variant. And that could have, like, if the hospital workers all start getting it, that could have a big impact. So anyway, whatever happens, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I'm not seeing anyone saying that they really know. But we'll have a little bit of a buffer here. So hopefully by a week today, even, we'll have a
Yeah.
better idea of what's going on in the European countries that are hit by COVID. And just because something seemed to have happened in South Africa, where there doesn't seem to have been a huge increase in hospitalizations, doesn't mean that's how it's going to play out in the rest of the world. They had a much higher rate of actual COVID infection in South Africa than they've had in the rest of in big, Western countries. So it could play out different here. Our population's older; it's less healthy than in general than in South Africa in terms of the comorbidities issue. So we don't know what's going to happen.
And it's way more vaccinated.
Yeah, way more
So,
vaccinated. That's right.
yeah, one thing I don't know, David, is whether all these outbreaks that are happening on NHL teams, including Edmonton and Calgary in our own province here, whether they are Delta or Omicron variant. I assumed when the burst happened, this was the vanguard of the Omicron wave. But I've heard things to the contrary, that it's actually somehow a new outburst of Delta. And I'm not the medical expert to really understand what's going on
Well,
here. And
that
they're,
that is odd, because there's not a
yeah,
big outbreak of Delta in the province, but there is on these teams. It looks like, and there's so little Omicron. I mean, it could be right. That's a slight possibility, but there's so little Omicron in the province that you'd think it's the Delta. And again, there's not a huge Delta out. We have low. It's been ever dwindling case rates since early October here in Alberta, and yet nonetheless they're having these big outbreak on these NHL teams in Alberta.
mhm,
So it
yeah,
is confusing. I find it is odd. Why is
and
that happening?
well, and at the same time, you have teams that came through here. I mean, the Oilers have mostly been in Edmonton, but the teams that came through here, several of them have had outbreaks, including Boston Bruins and Carolina Hurricanes, to name two that played here recently, that were wound up shutting down their own games soon thereafter. So there was certainly seemed to be some interaction between those teams that toured through Western Canada and all three of the Western Canadian teams also dealing with it. So there may have been,
Uh,
just the fact they were on
yeah,
the ice together.
that's an interesting thought. Might have what's been played out here, Bruce. All right, so not the news we were hoping for at
And oh,
Christmas time.
and I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but the other breaking news today is that the Edmonton Oilers have shut down their training facility right through the Christmas break. So there'll be no practices for the remaining healthy players. There'll be no official team activities whatsoever for the duration of this week until the morning of December 27th, when they're supposed to be ready to play in Calgary that night.
So now that has happened, Bruce. You can expect to see the Bison King on a local outdoor sheet of ice near you. So let's get ready, Edmonton, for our Bison King. Everyone, get your cameras out. Get ready to shoot Jesse Puljujärvi uh, skating around the ice of your
Well, at
local
least at least
hockey
he's at
rink.
least he's back. I mean, I
Yeah,
was
he's back
worried
in
for a
Canada.
time he was going to be saddled in a hotel in Seattle, but it sounds like the Oilers were able to extricate him. Kate's private jet, possibly, to bring him home last night, according to a report from Mark Spector, that he's that he was in the air at the time of his tweet, which was sometime late yesterday.
All righty, Bruce. The World Junior Tournament. Mark Spector had a tweet about that as well. I guess all the players have passed their tests. Honestly, just as someone living through these times, any little thing like if they can go ahead even without fans at this point, that's big for people. We need a morale boost. These morale boosts are all really important. Kids are still playing. My minor hockey team has 2 games this week.
Mm-hmm.
Really important for kids to, everyone to keep active as possible, as is reasonable. But if these World Junior Tournament games
safe
go ahead, that's fantastic if they can play. And I guess they're probably going to be in some kind of. I guess they'll try to up the level of non-contact with the rest of the world so these teams don't get infected in the next little while. They're all downtown community rink and at Red Deer. So we'll see what happens there, Bruce. But the Oilers have Xavier Bargot on the team, so we'll be able to hopefully watch him play. And that'll be just, in terms of morale boost, these are small things, but they're important things. And I look forward to it.
4 Edmonton Oil Kings also on the team. And the whole plan, of course, was last year Edmonton hosted the World Junior in the bubble, so they returned it to Edmonton so that the fans could actually get a chance to attend, which was the whole point of it being here. And right now, I would suggest that that's in doubt. I mean, we'll see what happens, but I mean, whether they'll go with a restricted attendance, like half attendance, or empty house, like happened in Montreal last week. It's such conflicting times, David. On Saturday, I'm a big soccer fan, as you probably know. And on Saturday morning, I watched 2 soccer games. One was from Bundesliga with a completely empty stadium where they shut it right down in Germany. And it used to be a novelty when they were first doing this. Hey, you can actually hear the sounds of the game. It's not like all just crowd noise, but you can really hear the sounds of the game. Well, in that scenario, you can not only hear the sounds of the game, you can hear the echoes of the sounds of the game because there's nothing in the frickin' stadium except for these, handful of athletes, kicking the ball around. And then 2 hours later, I watched a game on NBC, their Saturday game of the week that they showed from the Premier League in England. And that was a day where all the other Premiership games had been postponed except this one game. But here in this one game, they have a completely full stadium without a single mask in sight. And you think, well, if you're postponing all the other games and there's absolutely no restrictions on the one, like where is the middle ground, or is there even a middle ground? And I don't know which of the 2 that I watched, I don't know which one kind of more put me off my game, but the 2 in contrast to each other was pretty stark.
Honestly, Bruce, pity the decision makers right now, the people in charge of it, because there's on the one hand, we on one level we are all protected probably just about as much as we're going to be. I know there's going to be some, the pill that comes in, the Pfizer pill, I understand, is coming into the next month, so maybe that will change things somewhat. But we've been through 2 years of this almost now. We're double vaxxed, some of us triple vaxxed. Anyone who wants to be triple vaxxed will soon be triple vaxxed. Sweden, we have the example of Sweden that kept society open and hasn't experienced a 3rd, 4th, or 5th wave yet. The case counts are going up in Sweden, but there so far nothing else is, just like everywhere else. So it's a very difficult time, I think, for decision makers to know what is the right path. And we're going to see all kinds of different approaches, I guess, all over the world. I see Australia is now fining people $4,000 if they don't get vaxxed. This is typical of their approach, which has been very hardcore in terms of lockdown and pushing people to get vaccinated. What's the right thing to do? I'm going to suggest that it's going to take a couple of years after this is all over for all of us to look back and think, okay, here's who got it right. Here was likely the best practice. But I think it's probably too early to tell. And although I have strong feelings about this. Other people obviously have strong feelings about the best path forward. I acknowledge that, I could be completely wrong in terms of what I think is the best path forward. And I think it's an important acknowledgement for all of us to make that we don't know. We don't know what is the best thing, because what we do know is that both COVID has tons of damage, but I think we also understand by now that there's incredible collateral damage from lockdown that is having a massive impact on all of us. I think something that in some ways it's hard to put your finger on, but I think we're starting to feel it. And so there's these difficult balancing of two competing harms. Good luck to the decision makers, because you know what? Whatever decision they make, they're going to get blasted. They are totally going to
Yes,
get ripped.
that's 100% for sure. And there's, I mean, even the health authorities and those who go by the science. I mean, the science is one of the things about science is it evolves as you learn new information and you adapt to it. And there are things they got wrong, about droplets versus airborne transmission being a big one. And not that I want to go too far down that rabbit hole in a podcast about hockey, but they're the even those people are paddling like hell to try and figure this thing out. And it is, I mean, this new variant is apparently totally unexpected in terms of how evolved, how different it was from the previous versions of it. How many changes there were within this tiny virus. So it's a huge problem, and unfortunately, we do not have all of humanity pulling on the oars in the same direction at the same on the same beat. Let's just put it that way.
Or maybe it's fortunate, Bruce, because out of the debate, we'll come to the right decision, out of two conflicting sides. And there really is people who, there seems to be two sides, that, some people put a lot more weight in the need to shut down, and some people are really averse to that. So that's a real tension. And maybe, and we're seeing that tension expressed dramatically between approaches of different countries. And in the future, that will help us, I think, understand what is the best practice. Maybe 2 years from now we're going to say Australia nailed this from word go, or maybe we'll say Sweden did. But I think it is still too early to say. And it's funny because at different times during this whole pandemic, Bruce, um, Australia's looked like, you got it, and then at other times it's Sweden. Yeah, they did it right. So we don't. And again, I just think we'll see down the road what was the best policy, because, as you say, science has evolved, the virus has evolved, and it's difficult to know. All right, hockey. Anything we want to
Mm.
talk about the Oilers today, Bruce?
Oh,
Good.
well,
It's a good time to break, and that Zach Hyman gets to recover from his injury at
well,
least.
yeah. I mean, they all need this extra time. This week would have been absolutely savage. So better to put it off, I guess, even as there will be implications down the road as they try and squeeze this in. It looks more and more to me like the Olympic dream is about to be punctured with a wake-up call in the middle of the night saying you ain't going to China for no Olympics NHL players, no matter how much you want to. And they're going to have that time. They're going to have a hell of a complicated problem trying to reschedule games into arenas that have other commitments and so on. But I suspect that they will have that well, basically 3 week Olympic break to try and get a reset and a reschedule of many of these games. So uh, they,
You're assuming, Bruce. Excuse me. You're assuming they're going to not go to the Olympics then.
I'm assuming they're not going to go to the Olympics. The Olympic dream will be punctured. Yes, they will not go to the Olympics. I'd be
There.
shocked at this point if they went. There's just, I mean, there's over and above the problem of the NHL schedule being way behind is just the overlying health implications and the idea of having to potentially face a 3 to 5 week quarantine in China if you test positive over there. And when you look around the NHL and you see 15% of the league testing positive, because he got like 100. My count was 109 players on the COVID protocol list out of what 750 players in the league. So more or less 15%. Uh, I don't like those odds. If I'm a player, I don't want to go to China if I'm a player. And even if no matter how bad I want to play those games, now you're kind of hoping they put the whole Olympics off by a year at this point, like they did with the summer games. But it's
China may well do that. Wouldn't be a bad idea from their perspective. Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons not to go to China, period. And their COVID restrictions. I mean, they are the most restrictive, repressive place on earth for COVID restrictions, is my understanding. So players would be taking, I think, I would put it at, at this point, the possibility of them going to China says like what 5%, between 1% and 5%.
highly unlikely.
Yeah, highly unlikely. So
They'd be shocked.
there's still a chance. Like I heard Steven Stamkos talk about he still wants to go. He's willing to take the risk, but I don't think most players would be in that camp. We heard Connor McDavid, who's like desperately wants to be in a best on best competition. I think the answer, honestly, is a World Cup. Just have a World Cup next September if it's not too late to schedule that. Do something like that rather than have your best on best competition in that way, and forget about China and the Olympics. That would be my preferred option.
Yeah, and I know you would love to see the best on best competition as would I. I just don't think it's practical. And I like to say there's multiple levels of why it's impractical right now. And the NHL the NHL, surely the league doesn't want their players going there, but and they'll be putting maybe some subtle levels of pressure on the players, but they keep saying the decision's up to the players, and I think the players will decide not to go.
Alrighty, I think we've covered the ground here, Bruce. And I just want to say to people who hated this conversation, and there will be some who stopped listening long ago, and some who hung in there and still maybe hoping for hockey talk. We're talking about the hockey news at hand. It's all about this variant and the virus and lockdown possibilities. That's why we're addressing that. But I will say this: we are planning a podcast for later this week where we're going to look at various aspects of the Edmonton Oilers team to date. And it'll be all hockey. And so you can get that's what we want to talk about as well on this particular podcast. So that's what we intend to do in our next podcast. And hopefully we won't be derailed in that.
Right. Well, this was a game day. Originally, we were going to be talking about the Oilers and the Ducks tonight.
Yeah.
But, we got no game. So we do have to talk about the news of the day. I do feel as an Oilers fan, what I did do this morning was watch in its entirety the third period of Saturday's win against Seattle, and how well the Oilers played under dire circumstances, missing multiple players with a shorthanded roster, and how they rose to the occasion and shut down Seattle down the stretch and found a way to win that game. That leaves me with a little bit of a warm feeling about the team, even as December as a whole has been poor. They were showing signs of bouncing back, and winning that last game. They easily could have lost in Seattle, and we would have even more dire feelings as Christmas approached than we do. I mean, still got a warm feeling about that game on Saturday. That was a huge win.
Oilers Twitter was getting real negative and real nasty, and I'm glad we're going out on a two game winning streak here, because it just calms everybody down in that regard, at least, because and it's fair enough if people are against Ken Holland and Dave Tippett and want to see them fired. That's a valid expression as a fan. I have no problem with people saying that, but it's when the drum starts beating loudly, and I just it's not. I'm a glass half full kind of fan. So I find it a little bit oppressive, and it's not my thing. I just so I'm glad that we're going to have a little bit better mood, at least in terms of the Oilers themselves, with an 18-11 record, Bruce, without their top goalie for most of the year. I'll if someone said in September, will you take that? I'll say I'll take that every day of the week, all year long. 18-11, not bad. Now it's interesting. They're only ranked in terms of winning percentage, Bruce. They're only 15th in the NHL. But what you see is their
percentage.
points percentage.
Winning
Yeah.
percentage, they'd be way higher than that because
Yeah, you're
they
right.
got no loser points. They're all the points you can
Yeah.
win.
So it's interesting though. There's this huge gap though between 15 and 16 in terms of point percentage. And the Oilers there's halves right now in the NHL and have-nots. And it's the top 15 and that's it. The 16th team is quite a bit below the Oilers in points percentage. So the Oilers are clearly a have team. They're in the hunt. It wasn't that long ago. It was 2 weeks ago that they were first overall in points percentage in the NHL. So I'm still bullish on this team, and we'll get into that in a future podcast. Bruce, good talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.